When I called my son to ask about the date of his wedding, my daughter-in-law answered the call and said, "We got married yesterday. We only invited special people." Special people. Those two words hit me harder than any slap could. They sank straight into my chest and exploded there. After everything I had sacrificed for my son and his fiancée, 3 whole years of paying their rent, filling their home with groceries, putting their comfort before my own, yet somehow, I wasn't considered one of their special people. My name is Evelyn, a 75-year-old woman living a quiet, simple life in North Carolina, in the house I inherited from my late father. I get by on my monthly Social Security check and the little retirement savings I've managed to hold on to. I spent decades giving everything I had to my son, my time, my love. Even the small savings I had tucked away for my future. When my son grew into adulthood, I did what any mother with a soft heart would do. I stood by him. I supported him in the little ways I could, guiding him through life's bumps and uncertainties. And when he got a girlfriend and they both started struggling financially, I didn't think twice. For 3 whole years I paid their rent, bought their furniture, stocked their kitchen with food. All because I believed that family should stand on trust, loyalty, and love. But the day I found out they had a secret wedding without inviting me, something in me broke. The house suddenly felt too quiet, the air too heavy, and in that moment, I realized that all along no one truly loves me. They never truly cared about me. They cared for what I could give them. They only used me for monetary gains. The phone felt cool against my cheek. It was Wednesday. I remember that much. I was reaching for my tea bags, Earl Grey, when I dialed Lucas's number. I was smiling, an honest, unguarded smile. I was going to ask him about the date. The final date for the wedding. I had spent the last 2 weekends comparing linen samples. An expensive pearl white one that matched the color of Alara's eyes. The venue, the caterer, and the florist. All were waiting on my final deposit. I was paying for all of it, even though I didn't have much of my own. I dipped into my retirement savings to cover every last centerpiece, every chair rental, every unspoken expectation, because my son was struggling financially and I wanted to give him and Alara a wedding they could remember, even if it meant giving up a part of my own future. Lucas was my son, my only child, the one I had raised alone since his father simply vanished one spring morning 30 years ago. I remembered the fierce, protective instinct that had driven me to work 2 jobs, to save every spare dime, just to ensure Lucas never felt the shadow of that abandonment. And I felt, despite all the years of giving, that this wedding, this grand public confirmation of his happiness, would finally be my reward. The moment I would officially become a real mother-in-law and invited finally to the front of their lives. The phone rang twice. Lucas didn't pick up. Lara did. "Hello, Evelyn," she said. Her voice was too bright. It cut through the peaceful hum of the house, like a glass note shattering. I felt a slight, immediate tightening in my chest, a flutter of unease I was used to ignoring. "Elara, dear, how lovely to catch you. Is Lucas nearby? I just wanted to ask about the date of the wedding." Kept my voice easy and gentle. I had imagined my son laughing on the other end of the line, teasing me with details, letting me in on the plans. I had imagined Clara, his wife, smiling politely in the background, waving hello to me, the mother who had raised him with quiet patience and tireless devotion. I imagined being part of it. "He's around," she replied. Slight pause. Then, with a quick, almost manic laugh, she continued, "But you can talk to me. We're doing great. Better than great, actually." She sounded like someone talking about a lottery win. Too happy. Too excited for a normal Wednesday morning. "Wonderful, dear. I just wanted to ask, have you two settled on that first weekend in July yet?" I need to finalize the venue contract before the end of the month. I heard a sound on her end. Not Lucas. A light scraping sound. Maybe a chair being dragged. Or something being pushed into a new, permanent place. The silence that followed was long. Too long. It stretched and warped the light in my kitchen. Then she spoke, slowly, as if she were reading a line from a script she had memorized perfectly. "Oh, Evelyn, didn't Lucas tell you?" I gripped the phone tighter. The plastic dug into my palm. "Tell me what, dear?" My breath was already shallow. My inner voice knew something was terribly wrong, but my exterior demanded gentle politeness. We got married yesterday. The words didn't make sense. Like a foreign language I couldn't translate. A sudden, violent disconnect between sound and meaning. Married? What are you talking about, Ilara? The deposits are made. The church is booked for July. The dress is being altered. My breath caught in my throat. I sat down abruptly on the kitchen chair. The sun on the counter suddenly felt cold. The bright light was mocking me. She continued, her voice still unervingly cheerful. It was just a small thing. A very low-key wedding in a city hall. We decided we didn't want all the fuss, you know? All the obligation. Obligation. The words seemed to glow in the air. The obligation of my money. The obligation of my presence. The obligation of acknowledging the woman who birthed her husband and financed their life. A rush of cold, sickening realization washed over me. I had paid hundreds of dollars for the white dress she must have worn yesterday. Hundreds of dollars for the imagined flowers. For this precise public insult. I see, I managed to whisper. And the guests. Who was there? I was asking for proof. Hoping for a quick lie, a simple mistake. He paused again. This time I heard a genuine, cold, cruel smile in her voice. The kind of sound that strips the paint off a gentle memory. Oh, we kept it small. Very small, Evelyn. We only invited special people. Special people. The phrase hung there. Suspended. Perfect. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was a precise, calculated dismissal. A quiet, final judgment on my worth. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was a precise, calculated dismissal. A quiet, final judgment on my worth. Closed my eyes. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. I was simply too cold to move. Too stunned to respond. Evelyn, are you still there? She prompted, the false sweetness returning. Thanks again for everything. See you later. I finally found my voice. It felt dry and cracked. Enjoy your trip, Ilara. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. I didn't move for a long time. The house was silent again. But now it was a listening silence. The kind of quietness that feels like a gunshot fired directly into the heart. The phone rang. It was Lucas. I let it ring twice, watching the name glow on the screen. I answered quietly. Lucas's voice sounded strained the moment he picked up. His voice sounded guarded. Mom, I know you're upset. But we didn't invite everybody. We just wanted it to be a small wedding. I felt something twist in my chest. Everybody. I said quietly. Lucas, I'm not everybody. I'm your mother. He hesitated, then rushed into excuses. I know you are my mother. But it all happened so fast. Honestly, it was just a last-minute thing. Ilara wanted something simple and quiet. She didn't want the stress of a big wedding. Every word felt like he was trying to smooth the surface of a mistake that he didn't want to look at too closely. Still, he didn't offer a single apology. He offered only excuses that shifted the blame to an abstract stress and spontaneity, and away from their deliberate exclusion. "All right, I see," I replied, though my voice came out flatter than I intended. I let his flimsy words hang in the air, allowing the silence to accuse him where I could not. He hurried on, sensing the coldness. "So we're busy now, Mom. We'll call you later. Everything's fine. Just a lot. We just needed a break from everything." He was rushing me off, attempting to smother the conversation before it caught fire. "All right, Lucas," I said, the words quiet and final. I hung up, placing the receiver back in its cradle. I felt nothing for his excuses. His attempt at justification was just another expense I had to write off. I stood up and walked to the wall calendar, the large, colorful one where I had circled the tentative wedding date in red. I picked up the pencil, and with a slow, deliberate motion, I scribbled over the entire month of July, erasing the future I had been building for them. The shock was fading, replaced by something much heavier, a chilling clarity. They had used me until the very last moment of their need. I walked to the front door, the solid oak door that separated my quiet life from the rest of the world. I placed my hand on the cool brass knob. I felt the overwhelming, immediate need to change the locks, to change everything. I needed to know the cost. The total unbearable cost of being unspecial. I walked back toward the kitchen, toward the small desk tucked into the corner. My breath was shallow. My hands trembled as I reached for the top drawer. I pulled out a thick brown file. Inside were 4 years of meticulously filed bank statements. I had already seen the number for the past few months, but I needed the final tally. The total figure that represented my dignity, my sweat, my savings, and my future. All given away with a mother's heart full of love and concern. I laid the first statement out on the counter. The paper crackled under the bright sunlight pouring through the window. Sunlight that suddenly felt cruel and mocking. As I stared at the page, the numbers began to blur, swimming in front of me, turning into a painful reminder of everything I had given. My dignity, my sweat, my savings, my future. And when the weight of it all finally settled on my chest, heavier than anything I'd ever carried, I closed the file, walked to my bed, and let the tears fall until I cried myself to sleep. The morning after the call was not a day of movement but of stillness. I didn't cry again. Now, tears felt too cheap for this kind of wound and pain that runs through my veins. The house was cold, but I didn't turn up the heat. I sat at my small writing desk, the bank statements stacked in neat, chronological piles, smelling faintly of old paper and copper. This silence was different from the peaceful silence of the Maine coast. It was the heavy, pressurized quiet that follows a betrayal. I touched the top statement, the date printed precisely in black ink. It was the beginning of the end, though I hadn't known it then. My hands didn't tremble anymore. They were cold but steady. This was a necessary audit. I was no longer a mother calculating a wedding budget. I was an auditor, examining the ruins of a collapsed investment, the investment of a lifetime. The early years flashed behind my eyes. 30 years ago, when his father left us for his mistress. What follows next wasn't just a divorce. It was an amputation. He was just 2 years old. I remembered the hollow sound of the front door closing. I remember holding my crying toddler while the man I once loved drove away in a dusty blue car. He didn't even look back. I had promised Lucas then, through my tears, that he would never go without love, never go hungry, and never feel abandoned again. Every cent I earned, every late night shift, every meal I skipped, all of it was for him. I wanted him to grow up never knowing the emptiness I felt that day his father left. And for 30 long years I kept that promise. That promise became my sacred oath, my daily burden, and my deepest comfort. I believed that by providing financial stability, I was providing the love and structure his father had denied him. I worked hard, also saved. I learned to live on less so he could live on more. Every paycheck folded neatly into tomorrow's need. When Lucas grew older, and the numbers started chasing him, rent, tuition and repairs that never came cheap, I was there for him. I stood by him. Sometimes it was just a quiet call in the evening, his voice tight with worry. I never asked for details. I just said, "It's okay, baby. I'm always here for you. Check your account." When his first apartment swallowed more than his paycheck could cover, I found a way. I stayed up that night doing math I already knew didn't favor me. I paid his rent for 3 whole years. And when his old car broke down again on a rainy Tuesday, leaving him stranded, I covered the repair with a quiet sigh. It wasn't pride. It was the only language love had left me. To give quietly, even when it is my last cash. I had become the steady hand behind his growing years. Even into his adulthood. The wall that kept the wind from touching him. The echo of every promise his father forgot to keep. The money I was about to count wasn't just savings. It was the security I was supposed to have now. Every dollar was a physical manifestation of a sacrifice I had made for a future that had just been cancelled. I picked up a pen. I needed to see the final single number that represented my life's great, quiet miscalculation. I started with the early transactions. 4 years ago. The first transfer, $1,200, for the couple's dream apartment. It felt like the starting line of a marathon I hadn't realized I was running alone. I flipped the pages, month after month. A monotonous, draining river of support. Rent, food, stipends, and health insurance top-ups. I noted the occasional large gift. The down payment for their first car. The Christmas bonus that paid off Alara's student loan. Each entry carried a memory. This $5,500 was the summer I didn't replace my worn-out living room rug. That $2,200 was the furnace repair I put off until November, shivering through October nights. My discomfort was traded for their ease. My loneliness converted into their beautiful, velvet-lined life. All these sacrifices were made to support my son, who was facing financial difficulties. When I reached the column labeled Wedding Expenses, the pen hesitated. The $20,000 was meant for the July date, the date they abandoned. I mentally transferred that column from future happiness to personal injury. I saw the years I sacrificed my own needs for theirs. The bills I paid for Lucas when his construction job went quiet. The grocery runs I made to ensure they had a full fridge. I saw the promise of my young motherhood, distorted and used up by their adult entitlement. I was meticulously adding the final column, the miscellaneous support that covered everything from vet bills to their new espresso machine. Then I picked up the scratch pad. The total figure, compiled over 2 hours of painstaking silent work, finally stood alone on the paper. It was written in my neat, clear script. $60,200. My money, gone just to help them. The shock wasn't the number, but the clarity it brought. The money was the tether, and now I was cutting it. I picked up the bank statements, gathering them into a single heavy pile. I had quantified my life's great mistake. The transactional nature of our love had been officially documented. I reached for the telephone again. I didn't hesitate this time. I was calling the bank. I was no longer calling the bank to ask for help. I was calling to issue a command. I pressed the digits, the rhythm slow and deliberate. My heart was perfectly still. The sacrifice was over. My quiet private war had just begun. I had severed the financial cord. but the emotional line still hummed, taut and dangerous. I knew that by stopping the flow of money, I had created a dangerous vacuum. But this time I didn't care anymore. I decided to see the people who I once thought were my world one last time. With eyes completely unclouded by maternal hope, I took the ferry across the harbor, leaving the familiar quiet of my coastal town for the sharper, louder anxiety of the city where Lucas and Alara lived. The drive was long, the gray sky mirroring the cold, heavy feeling in my stomach. I was no longer a mother visiting her son. I was simply a witness observing a foreign land. The city felt abrasive. Too many lights and too much movement. Their apartment was in a modern, slightly sterile block. The kind of place that looks expensive and promises a life free of struggle. It was exactly the life my savings had bought them. I parked my old Volvo 3 blocks away, settling into a spot across from a small, dark dry cleaner. I kept the engine running, just for the quiet hum, a small companion in the immense silence of my own thoughts. The evening was settling in. The sky was the color of old pewter. Their window was on the 3rd floor. A single patch of golden light in the darkening facade of the building. I imagined them inside, not fighting, not plotting, but simply living, unburdened. I remembered Lucas telling me years ago, "Mom, you just make everything work." It wasn't a compliment. It was an expectation, a quiet resignation that I was merely the mechanic of his happiness. The only way to break that expectation was to become a silent observer, to become a witness to the truth of their life, unmediated by their phone calls and their excuses. To see myself truly as obsolete. I watched the movements inside, slow and distorted through the glass. The light was soft and incandescent, creating a warm domestic bubble. I saw Lucas first. He walked across the room, carrying a bottle of wine. He looked relaxed, his profile sharp against the lamp glow. The lie about being on the road vanished completely. He was home. Alara joined him by the window. She was wearing a loose, silky robe, casual and intimate. She laughed, tossing her hair back. It wasn't a joyful sound I could hear, but I could feel the careless, consuming nature of it. They clinked glasses, a silent toast to their new life. They settled onto the sofa. The sofa I had spent weeks choosing. The one I had had delivered myself, because Lucas had been too busy. They looked quite simply happy. Too happy, perhaps. And then I noticed the small details. The quiet shift in their reality. On the wall, where a watercolor landscape used to hang, one I had painted myself, there was now a large, abstract piece of art, geometric and cold. My landscape had been replaced by something new and impersonal. And then I saw the coffee table. It was new, polished mahogany, and on it a framed picture. I strained to see it through the reflection in the glass. It wasn't a picture of me. It wasn't even a picture of them. It was a photograph of Alara's parents, smiling broadly, placed centrally, proudly. The message was clear, silent, and brutal. My image, my presence, my history. It had all been relegated. They had built a new, complete world that simply did not require my memory. I watched them for another 10 minutes. They didn't look like they missed me. They only appear whole and contented. Lucas leaned over and kissed Alara's hand. It was a gesture of genuine, tender affection. The kind of affection I hadn't received, even as a thank you, for the thousands of dollars I had poured into their stability. The pain wasn't sharp. It was a dull, profound realization. They weren't bad actors plotting against me. They were just living their life. And my role was already finished. I was the bridge they had crossed and then deliberately burned behind them. I felt myself shrink in the driver's seat. I was just an aging woman in a parked car. watching a life I had financed but was forbidden to enter. I started the engine, feeling the gentle vibration under my foot. It was time to leave. I had seen enough of their happiness to cement my resolve. As I slowly pulled away from the curb, preparing to merge back into the anonymous city traffic, I took one last glance up at their window. The golden light was still there. Lucas was walking back across the room, past the new abstract art and the proud photo of Alara's parents. He reached the window and with a quick, reflexive gesture, pulled the curtain shut. But before the heavy fabric completely sealed their world away, I saw him pick up a discarded piece of paper from the side table. A large, expensive sheet of stock paper. He crumpled it once, hard in his fist. And then, instead of throwing it into the wastebasket, he tossed it onto the sofa, already half full of clothes and gifts. The paper wasn't just white. The color was distinctive. It was the same shade of pearl white, with the same texture, as the wedding linen sample I had chosen for the July ceremony. The sample I had brought home from the vendor just last week. He didn't need the money for the wedding, or the dress, or the church. Yet he still took the last of my savings right up until the day before the registry office. It was a final, cold confirmation. They had not only excluded me from their future, but they had also actively ridiculed the expense and effort of my attempt to be part of it. The light went out, and I realized my role hadn't been to stabilize his world. It was to pay for the furniture in the world he built for someone else. I drove home from the city in the deepest kind of silence. The night was cold, and the reflection of my own face in the driver's side window was the only company I had. The sight of Lucas and Alara, so casually happy in the world I had paid for, the crumpled wedding linen sample, had burned away the last vestiges of my hope. I had seen them whole, and their wholeness was built entirely on my removal. When I finally pulled into my driveway in the early hours of the morning, the house felt unfamiliar. It was too quiet and vulnerable. I didn't sleep well the previous night. I subsisted on weak tea and the cold, sharp clarity of betrayal. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state. I avoided my phone. I didn't return Lucas's text message, which simply read, "Got a weird error, Mom. Call you later." The weird error was, of course, the cancellation of his access to my bank accounts, which I had finalized immediately upon returning from the city. I knew that the real conversation, the inevitable one, was being delayed only until the moment of their absolute necessity. I spent the time working in my garden, pulling out late-season weeds with a furious, deliberate energy. I focused on the soil, the dry, gritty texture under my gloved hands. It was tangible, unlike their love, unlike their gratitude. I remembered the countless times Lucas had called me, always with a breathless, urgent tone. It was never to ask how I was doing. It was always to ask for a number, a routing number, a transfer amount. Now I realized that they saw me as the reliable, invisible dispenser, the ATM with legs. I knew their cushion was exactly 0. The rent was due on the 1st. The 1st was today. The phone rang precisely at 7 o'clock in the evening. I was sitting in the living room reading a book. I didn't rush. I let it ring 4 times. I watched the caller ID Alara. When I finally picked up, I spoke quietly and calmly. "Hello, Ilara." The sound on the other end was not the cheerful, silken voice of the bride who had excluded me. It was stripped bare, frantic, and tight with urgency. "Evelyn, thank God. You have to help us. We've been locked out." The transfer bounced. "Lucas is talking to the landlord, but he says the account was flagged as closed. We need that money right now, or we lose everything. She sounded like a child panicking over a lost toy. No apology for the wedding. Only the immediate, entitled demand. The fear in her voice was purely self-serving terror, focused entirely on the loss of her possessions and security. I allowed a long, cold pause. The account wasn't flagged, Elara, I stated, my voice low and flat. It was closed. I stopped the transfers. Elara gasped. Closed. But that's insane. You can't just do that. Not now. It's just the rent. You always pay the rent. Her voice dissolved into a desperate, demanding shriek. I was done listening to her panic. She had no right to my explanation. Your emergency is noted, Elara, I said, my voice hardening slightly. I cut the line before she could argue, pressing the end button with a feeling of absolute, final control. The house remained silent for exactly 22 seconds. Then the phone shrieked again. This time it was Lucas. His voice, when I answered, was not frantic like Elara's. It was tight, low, and vibrating with a terrifying, contained fury. What the hell, Mom? What did you just do to Elara? What is this nonsense about closing accounts? The landlord is standing right here. He's calling the police. This is your responsibility. He had moved immediately past asking for help into full-blown aggression and entitlement. The mask was completely gone. The years of quiet expectation had finally erupted into rage. My responsibility, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the phrase. That's an interesting word, Lucas. He had moved immediately past asking for help into full-blown aggression and entitlement. The mask was completely gone. The years of quiet expectation had finally erupted into rage. Don't play games, Mom. You know we are facing hardship right now. We have a life. You can't just destabilize us because you got your feelings hurt over a wedding party. His words confirmed everything. My pain was only an inconvenience to their financial machine. I waited until he finished his tirade. His breathing ragged and sharp over the phone line. When I spoke, my voice was quieter than before. It was measured, delivered with a slow, deliberate rhythm that forced him to listen. I am not playing games, Lucas. I am simply following your instructions. What instructions? He spat. I didn't tell you to lock us out. You did, I contradicted him gently, my voice lowering to a chilling, rhythmic whisper. I delivered the words slowly, emphasizing each key phrase, allowing the pause to amplify the rhyme and the cutting finality. You had your wedding. You had your bride. But you left me outside and claimed that your special day was only meant for special people. Wait. Didn't I already tell you? I only help special people. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. His rage dissolved into a choked, sputtering gasp. He realized in that shattering instant that his own cruel dismissal had become the weapon of his undoing. I hung up the phone gently and put a full stop on 30 years of obligation. It was a sound of finality, cutting off Lucas's enraged, sputtering voice mid-sentence. The house was silent again, the silence of a fortress. I had just taken away their breathing room. I knew then that the silence would not last. I had taken away the money. Now they would come for me, the source of the money. I was aware of the sheer audacity of what I had done. I had taken away the single most crucial element of their stability. I had in essence challenged them to a duel. And I knew they wouldn't just accept defeat. I walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I needed the mundane ritual of tea to anchor myself against the rising tide of fear. My hands were perfectly steady. The stillness felt unnatural, a profound contrast to the chaos I had just unleashed 300 miles away. I hadn't just denied them money. I had delivered a moral judgment. I had recited their cruelty back to them, perfectly packaged. I only help special people. That phrase, that piece of their own venom, was now their burden to bear. I knew Lucas. His initial rage would give way to calculation. He wouldn't beg. He would try to regain control, to re-establish the hierarchy of mother-son obligation, or probably try to manipulate me. He would try to bypass the financial problem by attacking me. I went into the dining room, where the accordion file lay open on the table, still showing the final tally. $60,200. This stack of receipts was my new defense. The evidence of my sanity, proven by their greed. I poured the tea and sat down to wait for the next move. The expected immediate callback didn't come. No frantic text. No voicemail demanding an explanation. The silence was absolute. Heavier than the simple sound of absence. It was a strategic silence. I watched the clock. 7:30. 8 o'clock. 9 o'clock. I found myself listening to the house again. Every creak, every shift in the old foundation sounded like a footstep. I felt a sudden urgent need to fortify the house, to prepare for a siege I had initiated. I found a heavy old oak wedge in the basement, a doorstop my father used. I drove it under the back door with the heel of my shoe until it was immovable. I returned to the living room, feeling marginally safer. But the adrenaline was sharp and unpleasant. I tried to focus on the book that I held in my hands, but my heart kept wandering away. At exactly 11:47 p.m., my outside floodlights snapped on. Immediately I froze. I stood slowly, moving to the window that overlooked the drive, keeping myself pressed against the wall. Two figures were standing by the mailbox, Lucas and Ilara. They were bathed in the harsh yellow light of the sensor, looking pale and furious. They weren't dressed for a honeymoon. They were dressed for a confrontation. They walked up the flagstone path toward the front porch. They didn't ring the bell. Lucas simply walked directly to the front door and, with a terrifying confidence, inserted the spare key into the lock. It was a small, quiet, yet profoundly shocking act of violation. He didn't knock. He simply turned the key, asserting his assumed right of access. The lock clicked open. But the door didn't budge. I had engaged the deadbolt, a detail he clearly hadn't anticipated. Lucas tried the handle, twisting it hard. When the door didn't open, he leaned his weight against it, confusion giving way to frustrated aggression. "Mom!" he shouted, his voice muffled yet still vibrating with rage against the glass pane. "I know you're in there. Open the door." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I watched Ilara step closer to him, her face tight, her voice sharp and demanding, though muffled by the wood. She was urging him on. Lucas rattled the handle again, his face inches from the wood. His hand slammed against the frame, a hard, dull thud that echoed through the otherwise silent house. He was inside my protection yet physically locked out. He was enraged but impotent. Then Lucas stepped back. He looked directly at the frosted glass window of the sidelight next to the door. He knew I was standing there. He knew I was watching. He looked around the porch, his eyes scanning for any other point of entry. His gaze landed on the heavy oak plant pot that sat by the entryway, and then, without a second thought, he grabbed the ceramic pot, lifted it, and smashed it to the ground, shattering it to pieces. The sharp crack of the ceramic pot hitting the porch stones was not just a sound. It was the physical demarcation line of war. Lucas had meant to smash the glass to force his way in. His rage, pure and unmasked, was the end of a long charade. They had retreated, leaving behind the dark, damp soil and the jagged shards, the debris of his failed violence. I waited 5 full minutes after their car sped away. I waited for 5 full minutes after their car sped away. Then, I slowly walked to the front door, slipping the deadbolt and easing the oak doorstop from the mudroom under the handle. I was secure, but the air in the house was thick with the residue of their hatred. The next morning, I swept up the debris myself, meticulously placing the broken ceramic and soil into a heavy bag. This was not just cleanup. It was an acknowledgement. The physical threat had failed. But the fight wasn't over. I felt drained yet strangely calm. The initial fear was replaced by a cold, sharp necessity. Lucas would realize that rage was ineffective. He would pivot to manipulation. I sat in the kitchen, drinking my Earl Grey. The silence punctuated only by the clock ticking. I was waiting for the call, preparing my defenses not with deadbolts, but with emotional armor. I rehearsed my responses, stripping them of every ounce of warmth or vulnerability. I knew the script he would follow. I had written it for him over 30 years of unquestioning generosity. The sun moved slowly across the floor. I watched the clock. I would not be rushed. I would not answer until I was ready to face the full weight of his hypocrisy. The phone rang late in the afternoon. It was Lucas calling. I answered on the 3rd ring. My voice was calm, a flat line of neutral endurance. "Mom." His voice was dangerously quiet. Gone was the rage from the previous night. It was replaced by a heavy, wounded disappointment. The voice he used when he wanted me to feel responsible for his sadness. "I need you to listen to me," he said. "Last night was bad. I was stressed. We were locked out. But this isn't about the money, Mom. It's about you." The pivot was predictable. He was trying to reframe the entire conflict from financial entitlement to maternal pathology. "This behavior," he continued, his voice heavy with false concern. "This shutting off accounts, changing access. It's not you. You're normally so generous, so helpful. I'm worried about you, Mom. Seriously, this isn't rational." He launched into a calculated monologue, using the past to strangle the present. "Think about everything, Mom. Everything you taught me. Stability. Trust. When Dad left, you were the rock. You were the one who sacrificed everything. I remember you freezing in the winter because you put the heating money into my college fund. That's who you are. That's the foundation you built." He paused, letting the weight of my past sacrifice settle on me. He wasn't praising the sacrifice. He was weaponizing it. He was saying, "Your past actions compel your present subservience. And now, to suddenly, without warning, cut us off, to leave us in the street, that undoes everything you taught me. It makes your whole life look erratic. I don't recognize this person, Mom. And I'm scared for you." He tried to draw Ilara into the guilt, painting them as victims of my instability. "Ilara is beside herself. She keeps saying you wouldn't do this unless something was deeply wrong. We're your family, Mom. We're the only ones who can truly look out for you right now. I listened perfectly still. I noted the language. Erratic, worried, destabilized, look out for you. The narrative was being meticulously constructed. Look, I'm going to offer a solution, he said, his tone shifting to one of reasonable negotiation, the voice of the responsible adult dealing with a difficult dependent. Just for a few months, I will call the bank. I will get the automatic transfers back on. We will pay the rent. And then, when we get back, we can sit down with a neutral third party, maybe a financial planner, to look at your accounts, just to make sure you're okay. That everything is safe. The neutral third party was the dagger wrapped in velvet. It wasn't about planning. It was about surveillance. It was the soft introduction of external judgment over my financial decisions. What isn't rational, Lucas? I finally asked, my voice a flat refusal to engage in his guilt trip. Cutting off your only son's ability to live. You know how hard it is out here. You know I'm trying to build a career. That's what mothers do. You always told me you'd be there for me and that you'd never turn your back on me. I let the silence hang again, a heavy, accusatory blanket. Lucas, I stated, breaking the quiet. I have thought long and hard about my responsibilities and my past generosity. Good, he said quickly, relief coloring his tone. So you'll put the rent back through. We can talk about whatever this is later. No, I stated simply. I won't be putting the rent back through. His breathing hitched slightly. The false calm shattered. A new terrifying sound emerged. A cold, hard, professional tone. The echo of the lawyer he had already hired. Listen to me, Mom. I am being honest with you because I love you. Ilara and I have already spoken to a specialist. They advised us that your actions, the deliberate cancellation of vital living expenses and the aggressive and unpredictable financial maneuvering, are all indicators. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He was reading from a script. Indicators of what, Lucas? Indicators that you are not fully competent to manage your own estate. He said the word slowly, deliberately. The sudden shift is evidence. The fact that you are now refusing to communicate with your only family. The fact that you threw a fit over a wedding. It all points to a temporary lapse in judgment and capacity. Shows you are mentally unstable. He continued, his voice hardening further, cementing the threat. The specialist said that if you do not immediately reinstate the funds, they will advise us to file papers for guardianship of the estate. It's not what we want, Mom. But if you force us to protect you from yourself, we will. He was not appealing to my heart. He was appealing to the legal authority that could dispossess me. I waited until he finished. His controlled anger had been replaced by a deep, profound resentment and the calculated cruelty of the legal threat. Fine, he bit out. If that's the kind of person you're going to be, if you're going to put us on the street right after our wedding, then you leave me no choice. Then I closed my eyes. The war had moved from my kitchen to my mind. He didn't just want the money. He wanted my sanity declared invalid. You need to know, he continued, his voice now colder than before. I have already spoken to my family attorney. They advised me that your actions, the closing of the accounts, the sudden erratic behavior, give us legal options. So note this. Next time it won't be just me and Ilara. It will be the law. I finally spoke, my voice calm, steady, and utterly devoid of fear. I see, Lucas. You came to my door with rage. Now you come with legal words. But I am neither scared nor incompetent. I delivered the final sentence as a promise. The next time you talk about my financial decisions, you will be talking to my lawyer. Then I hung up. The house was silent, but my mind was racing, sharp and clear. The battle was not emotional. It was administrative. I was not erratic. I was simply defending my life against an attempted legal theft. I realized then that if they were going to call me reckless, I needed to hire someone who could prove their greed. The threat Lucas delivered on the phone. Next time it won't be just me and Ilara. It will be the law. Had stripped the final veneer of emotional safety from my life. I was no longer fighting family. I was fighting my son, who had turned himself into my enemy. The silence after that call was no longer strategic. It was malignant, a vacuum waiting to be filled by the heavy, official sound of the court system. I lived in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the formality of the court system to validate his rage. I feared the cold, calculated efficiency of paperwork far more than the broken terracotta on my porch. I knew they were moving. I felt it in the atmosphere of the house, heavy and oppressive, like a storm that refused to break. For 2 days I had watched the street, not for their car, but for the anonymous vehicle of the law. My routine became a desperate performance of competence. I moved from the kitchen window to the living room window, checking the mail slot, listening for any sound. I kept repeating Lucas's word. Erratic. It was the perfect, insidious word. It took my justifiable reaction, the defense of my own money, and framed it as a sign of mental decline. It was a word designed to make me doubt the very ground I stood on. I started observing my own behavior with painful scrutiny. Did I forget where I put my keys? No, they were on the hook. Did I mix up the dates? No, the calendar was clear. But the self-doubt was a slow poison. What if they convince a judge? What if my fear looks like confusion? My quiet life, once a comfort, now felt like evidence against me. A solitary old woman, easily isolated, easily dismissed. The solitude that had long been my strength was now my greatest vulnerability. I thought about the money. The $60,200 I had calculated. Their motive was to keep getting more money from me. The legal papers were the mechanism. On the third day, the air pressure in the house seemed to drop. The sky outside was a uniform, suffocating gray. I was sitting at the dining table, the bank statements laid out, my defense materials. My only companion was the silence, now an accomplice to my anxiety. Around noon, a car drove slowly down my street. A nondescript sedan, an older model, a shade of institutional beige, stopped directly in front of my mailbox. Then a man got out. He was dressed in a suit that was too large for him, the fabric cheap and synthetic. He carried a clipboard and a solemn, professionally detached expression. He walked up the driveway with deliberate, slow steps. His task was clean, official, and utterly cold. He rang the doorbell. I didn't answer. I stood in the shadow of the hallway, watching his silhouette through the frosted glass of the sidelight. He tried the handle. He must have seen the deadbolt. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a long, heavy envelope. It was thick, white, and marked with the unmistakable, formal lettering of a law firm. Certified mail. The man slipped the envelope into my mail slot. It landed on the hardwood floor with a soft, final thud. He then affixed a sticker, a proof of service notice, to the doorframe near the handle. He executed his function and drove away, leaving behind the only physical object in the world that could truly threaten my future. I walked slowly to the door. The envelope lay there, heavy and dense. It was a barrier, a wall of formality erected between me and my son. I carried it back to the dining table. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the cold realization of the gravity of my son's threat and anonymity towards me. I used the letter opener, a thin silver object, to slice through the seal. Inside there was a stack of documents. The letterhead, crisp and black, belonged to Whitmore Legal Group. The title of the leading document was stark and immediate: Petition for appointment of guardian of the person and estate. I read the opening paragraphs, the words swimming slightly under the harsh kitchen light. The petition stated that the petitioners, Lucas and Alara, had reasonable belief that the respondent, Evelyn, is an incapacitated person. It didn't just mention my actions. It cited them with chilling specificity, using the technical, sterile language of the court to invalidate my entire history of self-reliance. 3 grounds for incapacity. Number 1. Financial imprudence and recklessness. The respondent has exhibited a clear inability to manage assets, evidenced by the sudden, reckless dissipation of significant retirement capital, $60,200 provided to petitioners over a 3-year period, followed by an immediate, irrational termination of basic support payments, demonstrating cyclical and unpredictable financial decision-making that poses a threat to her remaining estate. Number 2. Decline in capacity and judgment. The respondent exhibits social isolation and a clear pattern of declining judgment, indicated by erratic hostility, emotional instability, and refusal of communication with her only son following a period of extreme generosity, suggesting a lack of mental clarity necessary for fiduciary oversight. Number 3. Immediate risk to estate. The respondent poses an immediate, substantial risk of harm to her own financial estate due to the recent arbitrary attempt to close and liquidate accounts, requiring immediate court intervention to prevent further dissipation of assets. The reference to the $60,200, the precise amount I had sacrificed for their well-being, slammed into me. They hadn't just been accepting my money. They had been tracking it and turning my maternal love into an evidence against my sanity. They had manufactured a legal weapon out of my financial sacrifice. They were requesting the court declare me mentally incompetent for financial oversight and appoint an independent guardian to take control of all my assets, bank accounts, and the North Carolina house. The goal was not money repayment. The goal was complete control over my future. I looked past the formal language and saw the true cruelty. The document demanded I submit to a court-ordered medical evaluation by a physician chosen by the petitioner's attorney. My body and my mind were now under subpoena. Attached was a schedule listing my primary assets, which includes my house address, the bank account numbers I had just closed, and a small brokerage account I had hoped to use for my eventual retirement travel. Every detail of my security was now laid bare. I stared at Lucas's name, printed neatly as the lead petitioner. He hadn't just cut me out of his wedding. He was trying to erase my legal identity, using the law to permanently silence the source of his money. I spread the papers out across the table, covering the scratch pad. The air was heavy with the stench of synthetic paper and betrayal, but the paralyzing fear was suddenly replaced by a cold, hard focus. I was not erratic. I was simply defending myself against a calculated financial attack. The document was a roadmap of their greed and, more importantly, a deadline. I stood up, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out the old telephone directory. I flipped to the legal listings, my finger tracing the columns. I needed more than a defense. I needed someone who understood that this was not a dispute over money but a battle for my very selfhood. I found the name I was looking for. My father's attorney, a man known to my late father for his relentless, quiet integrity. His name is Mr. Jordan Clee. I called him and set up an appointment to meet him the next day in his office. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady on the dial. The time for sorrow was over. The fight was no longer fought with tears or silence. It was fought with facts and deadlines. If they were going to call me reckless, I needed to hire someone who could prove their greed. I dressed carefully that morning. Not in morning black, but in a tailored navy dress. Something sharp, neutral, and competent. A color that suggested clarity. I needed to look like a woman who was perfectly capable of managing her own affairs, financial or otherwise. The final act of defiance was presenting a perfectly controlled exterior. I drove toward Mr. Jordan Clee's office in the older, granite-faced district of the city. The architecture was solid and enduring, suggesting a history of quiet, dependable work. A sharp contrast to the aggressive modernity Lucas preferred. When I entered his office, the atmosphere was hushed. The dark wood paneling and the scent of leather conveyed permanence. Mr. Clee met me at the door of his private office. He was a silver-haired man with the patient, penetrating eyes of a seasoned observer. He saw the petition, but he was looking at me. "Mrs. Hayes," Mr. Clee said, indicating a comfortable leather chair opposite his desk. "Thank you for coming in quickly. The urgency of a guardianship petition is paramount, especially when the goal is not protection but appropriation." I placed the envelope on his desk. "I want to be clear, Mr. Clee. I am not here to reclaim the money I gave my son. That $60,200 is gone, and I accept the cost of that misjudgment. I am here to ensure that his greed does not invalidate my future, and that I retain control over my remaining assets, including the trust fund he hopes to access." Mr. Clee nodded slowly, reviewing the documents with surgical speed. "They have made a classic mistake. By claiming reckless dissipation of capital through transfers to themselves, they have explicitly linked their financial reliance to your alleged incompetence. This proves the motive." He looked up. "Their entire case rests on two pillars, Mrs. Hayes. One, that you are mentally unstable, the petition for person, and two, that your decision to terminate funding was irrational, the petition for estate. We will dismantle both." Mr. Clee slid a legal pad toward me and outlined our immediate counter-strategy. First is the defense of competence. Their demand for a court-ordered medical evaluation is their strongest play, Mr. Clee stated. They want their doctor to ask you ambiguous, stressful questions that, when viewed through the lens of a familial breakdown, appear unstable. We will neutralize this immediately. He picked up his desk phone. "I need you to schedule a meeting with a colleague of mine, Dr. Mabel Reed. She is a highly respected geriatric psychiatrist. We will not wait for the court to order it. We will preemptively provide our own unassailable evidence of your cognitive function." He finalized the appointment quickly. It was set for the following morning. "Your task, Mrs. Hayes, is to be the rational, factual person you are. This evaluation is our shield. When you go, you are not a patient. You are a client providing evidence. Be clear, calm, and utterly factual about your decisions. The second part is to prove the decision to stop funding was entirely rational," Mr. Clee continued. "To do this, we need witnesses who can testify to your long-term clarity and independence. People who interact with you outside of the family sphere. My neighbor Margaret," I offered immediately, "and a few of my friends." "Perfect. They can provide affidavits that testify to your engagement, your memory, and your daily competence. They prove you are not isolated, as the petition claims. Finally, Mr. Klee said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial register, we attack the immediate risk claim. Lucas and Ilara's petition emphasizes their imminent homelessness due to your withdrawal of rent. This is their plea for emergency relief. I decided to pull the transaction history for their lawyer, Mr. Daniel Straker, and their landlord, using the court documents. Mr. Klee pulled a single printed bank record toward me. It was a statement from the landlord's account. Look at this, Mrs. Hayes. He pointed to a date, 2 days after you closed your accounts and the day before Lucas filed the petition. The entry was small, but the description was damning. Deposit. Late fee Hayes Apartments. Amount. $350. This is key, Mr. Klee explained, leaning over the desk. They had to know the rent was late, but they did not use $1,200, their approximate rent, to solve the crisis. They used $350, the late fee, to buy a week or two of grace from the landlord, ensuring they wouldn't be locked out immediately. I stared at the number. The sheer, calculated malice of it made my blood run cold. They manufactured the emergency. Exactly, Mr. Klee confirmed. They paid just enough to maintain the appearance of imminent risk for the judge while avoiding actual immediate eviction, which would have been too messy and distracting. They used their very small remaining funds to buy a legal narrative, not to solve their problem. This single transaction proves their motive is not self-preservation but a calculated legal scam to seize the trust fund. The $60,200 was the bait. The $350 late fee was proof of the trap. Our strategy is now set, Mr. Klee announced, gathering the papers. We use the psychiatric evaluation and the witnesses to confirm your mental capacity. Then we use the $60,200 and the $350 late fee to expose their fraud and prove their motive is purely criminal. I stood up, feeling a strength I hadn't possessed in years. The paralysis was gone. I had facts, strategy, and an honest champion. What is the next step, Mr. Klee? The next step is to prepare your mind. You will meet Dr. Reed tomorrow morning. We will then file the evaluation, the witness affidavits, and the subpoena on the landlord's account into the court record. That will force Justice David look past the tears and just go straight to the evidence. I left the office and walked back to my car, carrying the weight of the petition but also the lightness of the plan. I knew the fight was just beginning. But for the first time since Lucas's betrayal, I felt like I was holding the compass. The road ahead was clear, and my focus was absolute. I drove home, ready to prove my sanity to the cold scrutiny of the court. The crucible of competence. The morning after meeting Mr. Klee, I drove to Dr. Mabel Reed's office. This was the front line of the defense. If Lucas could cast doubt on my mind, he could seize my life. I knew this evaluation was not a checkup. It was a crucible designed to prove my fitness to the court. I wore the same navy dress, a uniform of professional stability. Dr. Reed's office was quiet and bright, filled with natural light. She was a woman with calm eyes and an acute, clinical gaze. The session lasted 3 hours. It was grueling, methodical, and entirely necessary. Dr. Reed began with standard cognitive assessments, recalling words, drawing a clock, and answering questions about current events. I answered each with precision, my memory sharp from a week of intense focus. The core of the evaluation, however, was psychological. probing the erratic hostility Lucas had claimed. "Mrs. Hayes," Dr. Reed began gently, "your son, Lucas, and his wife claim that your sudden decision to terminate financial support was fueled by irrational anger and a hostile reaction to their marriage. Can you describe, factually, the process that led to your decision?" I spoke without emotion, maintaining the same objective distance I used when calculating the $60,200 I spent to help them. "The decision was based on solvency, doctor, not hostility. For 3 years, I subsidized their life at a cost of $60,200 of my retirement. When they chose to actively exclude me from the most important event of their lives, the wedding I had funded, it became clear that my role was purely transactional. The rational course of action was to prioritize my own financial security. My emotional distress did not cause the decision. It merely confirmed the necessity of the decision. I explained the fraudulent late fee payment Mr. Klee had found, the $350 used to sustain the legal fiction of homelessness. "My son's actions prove that he is a financial manipulator," I concluded. "My decision to defend myself is the highest form of rational self-preservation." Dr. Reed wrote for several minutes, her expression unreadable. When the session ended, her handshake was firm. "The report will be filed with Mr. Klee by tomorrow, Mrs. Hayes. You have provided clear, factual, and consistent evidence of competence." A profound sense of relief washed over me. The shield was forged. With the psychiatric report secured, I moved to the second stage of the defense, gathering the witnesses against Lucas's claim of social isolation. My neighbor, Margaret, an older woman known for her keen observation and quiet independence, was the first to sign an affidavit. She spoke of our weekly coffees, my volunteer work, and my meticulous maintenance of the house and garden. "Evelyn is the most clear-headed woman I know," Margaret dictated for the notary. "She remembers things I forget. To call her isolated or confused is a calculated lie." I then met with 2 women from my old school club. They testified to my organization, my ability to plan complex schedules, and my active participation in community life. Their affidavits countered the legal claim of decline in capacity, with concrete evidence of engagement and clarity. The affidavits, paired with Dr. Reed's report, provided a powerful, multifaceted defense. Lucas's narrative of the confused, isolated old woman was dead before the first gavel even fell. 2 days later, after Mr. Klee filed the final evidence packet, Lucas and Ilara came to my house. I was in the kitchen when the familiar sleek, black sedan pulled into the driveway. This time, they didn't bring a paid consultant. They brought themselves, emboldened by desperation and the last shred of their self-serving narrative. I immediately initiated the video recording on my phone, placing it discreetly on the counter. I secured the deadbolt and the chain. Lucas knocked a polite, firm rap. "Mom, we need to talk about the documents Mr. Klee filed. This is insane. You're going to bankrupt yourself with lawyers." I opened the door only slightly, the chain taut. The sliver of opening allowed me to see the raw panic flickering in his eyes. "You are in violation of the order not to discuss my legal or financial affairs, Lucas," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through his noise. Ilara stepped forward, tears welling up. A performance perfected in the hours since Klee had filed the late fee evidence. "Evelyn, please. We are your family. This is why we need you to sign this. This will end everything." She pushed a thick envelope through the opening. It was a revised power of attorney, still containing language that granted Lucas total financial control. labeled deceptively as an emergency family resolution. Ilara, I said, looking not at the papers but at the fear in their faces. I have just completed a professional psychiatric evaluation. My mental competence has been affirmed by a court-appointed specialist. I have also submitted 3 affidavits from community members testifying to my clarity. The blow landed hard. Lucas recoiled as if struck. The last pillar of their guardianship petition, the supposed mental decline, had crumbled. I know about the $350 late fee you paid the landlord to fabricate your imminent risk for the court, I continued, pressing the attack, using the factual evidence as a weapon. The court now knows your claim of being on the street was a lie. The mask ripped away entirely. Lucas's face contorted in a sneer of pure, malignant hatred. You think you won with your old friends and your stupid little doctor? He snarled, abandoning all pretense. You think we care about your $60,200? You old fool. We don't want the money you gave us. He lunged toward the door, his voice low and vicious, forcing the words through the narrow gap. We want your signature to access the trust fund, the one your dad left you. We are your only heirs, and you are going to be declared too confused to run your life. We will take the money, Mom. Every last cent of the $300,000 you were too scared to touch. You can keep your sanity. We'll take the wealth. The sheer figure, the long-forgotten $300,000, slammed into me. The $60,200 was indeed merely the operational cost of the legal war. The inheritance was the prize. Get off my property, I ordered, my voice ringing with cold, absolute authority. Your witness is dismissed. Your attempt at fraud is noted. I will see you in court. I slammed the door, locking the chain. I picked up the phone and immediately called Mr. Klee. They just confirmed the trust fund, Klee. And they violated the order. Perfect, Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Klee replied, his voice sounding entirely satisfied. We have everything we need. You have provided all the evidence necessary for a definitive victory. Now we wait for the gavel. I had passed the test of my mind and exposed their ultimate deception. The only thing left was the judge. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and unforgiving. I stood outside the courthouse, a stern structure of granite and marble, the weight of the last 6 weeks of preparation settling on me. The guardianship petition, the ultimate expression of Lucas's greed, was about to meet its factual demise. I carried not the grief of a mother, but the cold confidence of a litigant armed with an unassailable defense. I met Mr. Klee in the hallway. He looked at me, not with concern but with approval. You are calm, Mrs. Hayes. That is our strongest asset today. I am ready, Jordan. I proved my sanity to the psychiatrist. Now I will prove their fraud to the court. The courtroom was quiet, small, and paneled in dark wood. We took our seats at the defense table. Across the room sat Lucas and Ilara, flanked by Mr. Daniel Straker. Lucas looked unnaturally pale, his expression carefully constructed to convey a deep, wounded sincerity. Ilara clutched a handkerchief, ready for her performance as the distraught, innocent victim. Mr. Straker began, delivering a florid opening statement about a concerned son forced to intervene in his mother's tragic financial decline. He focused entirely on the $60,200 as the metric of my reckless dissipation. He called Lucas to the stand first. Lucas's testimony was a masterpiece of melodrama. He spoke of his love, his fear, and his shock over the sudden, irrational abandonment that put him on the brink of homelessness. He conveniently omitted the trust fund, the secret wedding, and his failed attempt to force the power of attorney. Mr. Clee's cross-examination was swift and brutal, aimed at shattering Lucas's credibility. Mr. Lucas Hayes, Mr. Clee began, his voice dry. You testified that your imminent homelessness compelled you to file this emergency petition. Is that correct? It was a matter of desperation. Yet 2 days after your mother ceased funding, your lawyer's firm paid the landlord's late fee on your behalf. Is that also correct? Lucas stammered, avoiding the judge's eyes. I'm not privy to the details of my lawyer's payments. That was for the retainer. But you were aware, Mr. Hayes, that paying only the late fee would purchase you time with the landlord, thereby ensuring you were not immediately evicted. You intentionally kept the threat of homelessness alive for this courtroom. Did you not, Mr. Hayes? You used your limited funds to manufacture evidence, sir. This was not desperation. It was legal staging. Lucas could only manage a mumbled "no, sir," which hung weakly in the air, instantly undermining his entire victim narrative. Mr. Clee then called our key witnesses. Margaret, my neighbor, testified with clear, unwavering conviction about my community engagement and the absolute independence of my daily life, directly contradicting the claim of social isolation. My old schoolmates affirmed my organizational skills and sharp memory. Then came the clinical defense. Mr. Clee called Dr. Reed, the geriatric psychiatrist. Dr. Reed, Mr. Clee asked, based on your thorough evaluation, what is your professional finding regarding Mrs. Evelyn Hayes's mental capacity and cognitive competence to manage her personal and financial affairs? Dr. Reed looked directly at Justice David. My findings are definitive, Your Honor. Mrs. Hayes exhibits no signs of cognitive decline or impairment. Her memory, executive function, and judgment are sound. And did her decision to cease financial support for her son and daughter-in-law appear irrational? Quite the contrary. Mrs. Hayes presented a meticulously documented, rational argument that the continuation of the financial drain posed an imminent threat to her own long-term solvency. The decision to prioritize her own financial security after her son's display of disrespect was an act of rational self-preservation, not erratic hostility. Mr. Straker's cross-examination was quickly shut down when he tried to suggest Dr. Reed was biased. Justice David affirmed the doctor's credentials and clinical authority. When it got to my turn, I walked to the stand, carrying the full weight of my dignity. I looked at Justice, calm and composed. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Clee asked, why, after years of financial sacrifice, after giving your son $60,200, did you choose to stop? Because, Your Honor, I stated, my voice clear and measured. I realized I was no longer funding a life, I was funding a lie. My son and his wife excluded me from their wedding, confirming that my role was purely transactional. The moment my role became purely transactional, my duty shifted from generous mother to responsible fiduciary of my own limited funds. I presented the trust fund as the true motive, citing Lucas's angry admission captured during the attempted intrusion. Their lawsuit is not a petition for my protection. It is a calculated legal extortion based on the assumption that an elderly mother would rather lose her money than endure the trauma of proving her sanity to protect the $300,000 trust fund they hope to access. I have provided the court with a psychiatric evaluation, the witness testimony, and the evidence of their staged financial crisis. I have met every demand made of my competence. Justice David listened intently, looked down at the pile of documents. Dr. Reed's conclusive report, the affidavits, and the bank statement proving the $350 late fee fraud. She picked up her gavel. The court has heard the evidence, Justice announced, her voice quiet, deliberate. The petitioner's claims regarding the respondent's supposed decline in capacity and judgment have been decisively rebutted by professional psychiatric testimony and community witness accounts. She fixed her gaze on Lucas and Ilara. Furthermore, the evidence presented strongly suggests the petitioner's primary motive for filing this action was the enforcement of an established financial drain, which they sought to disguise as a protective measure. The attempt to manufacture a crisis for the court through the payment of only the late fee demonstrates a profound lack of ethical conduct. She struck her gavel down, a sharp, resounding sound. The petition for guardianship of the person and estate is hereby denied in its entirety. The court finds the respondent, Mrs. Evelyn Hayes, to be fully competent, independent, and capable of managing all her financial and personal affairs. Judgment is entered in favor of the respondent. A collective sigh of relief came from my side of the room. Lucas and Ilara were frozen, their faces etched with shock and absolute defeat. I rose from the stand, my legs steady. Mr. Clee shook my hand, his face radiating satisfaction. "You won, Mrs. Hayes. Your competence is legally affirmed." I walked toward the exit, passing Lucas and Ilara. Lucas looked up, his eyes filled with a searing, pure hatred. The last glance of a man who had gambled and lost. I met his gaze, holding it until he looked away, defeated. I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright, cold sunlight. The legal victory was complete. I had lost $60,200 and a son, but I had reclaimed my dignity and my future. The court had not just dismissed a petition, it had formally stamped my independence. The courtroom affirmed my competence and autonomy. Now the path to reclaiming my life and finding peace could finally begin. The moment the courthouse doors closed behind me, the cold granite air was replaced by the warm, clean air of the street. I was legally free, my competence affirmed by the judge's sharp gavel. The burden of the guardianship petition was gone, but the emptiness it left was immense. The $60,200 was the price of a hard-won lesson, and the son who took it was lost forever. The silence was now overwhelming. No longer the tense quiet of waiting but the heavy quiet of finality. I drove home not to celebrate, but to begin the arduous process of unclenching. The psychological armor I had worn for months, the factual detachment, the absolute control, felt fused to my skin. Mr. Clee had handled the final paperwork swiftly. Lucas and Ilara made no attempts at appeal. The evidence of fraud was too conclusive. They simply vanished from the court system. My first week of freedom was strangely hollow. My accounts were unfrozen, but I felt paralyzed by the freedom to spend or save. I sat at my dining table, staring at the empty space where the legal papers had been. The house was too quiet. The victory was immense, but I was still alone, sitting in the structure of the life that had been attacked. I called Margaret, my neighbor and witness, inviting her for coffee. She arrived with a small potted begonia, a replacement for the terracotta Lucas had smashed. "You won, Evelyn," Margaret said, placing the plant on the kitchen counter. "You stood up to him, and you won." "I won the legal battle," I corrected, stirring my tea. "But I realized I didn't just lose a son. I lost the central narrative of my motherhood. I was buying attention, not love. That emptiness is still here." Margaret didn't offer platitudes. "That emptiness is where you build something new, Evelyn. That garden club I told you about. Do you remember?" I nodded. She continued, "The women there are amazing. We've all paid a price for loving too much. We share stories, not seeds." Hesitantly, I accepted Margaret's invitation and attended the next garden club meeting. It wasn't about pruning roses. It was about pruning trauma. The women were sharp, independent, and insightful. One woman, a retired accountant, spoke of her daughter who constantly fabricated emergencies for cash. Another, a former teacher, spoke of her nephew who used guilt to access her life insurance. Another spoke of how her only son tried to kill her to access her insurance, but she miraculously escaped. They don't see us as people, the accountant noted bitterly. They see us as a resource pool. Our sacrifice is just their business plan. It was a profound moment of recognition. I shared the story of the $60,200 and the subsequent legal assault. I spoke of the trust fund and Lucas's cold calculation. The women listened, not with pity, but with fierce solidarity. They understood the unique violation, the weaponization of love. This community was my new anchor. I realized that my isolation was self-imposed, driven by shame over my son's behavior. Healing was not a solitary act. It was a communal one. I started to embrace self-care, not as a luxury, but as a hard-earned dignity. I began to dismantle the physical relics of my old life. The phone I used to answer Lucas's calls with dread was replaced. The banking system that had enabled the years of transfers was abandoned for a new, highly secure financial institution. I thought about the final venomous words Lucas had scrawled on the photograph. Never alone. The threat was meant to paralyze me. But now, with Margaret and the garden club, I realized the words were empty. I wasn't alone. I was simply independent. I made a final, powerful decision. I would sell the house. It was the last symbol of the life I had built for Lucas, the place where the betrayal took root. Selling it was not running away. It was claiming my right to a new beginning. 6 months after the courtroom victory, my life was unrecognizable. Lucas and Ilara disappeared completely. Mr. Klee confirmed they were facing significant financial hardship. The full rent, compounded by their lawyers' fees and the loss of the $60,200 subsidy, had proved insurmountable. Their manufactured crisis had become their true reality. I moved into a bright, modern apartment closer to the city center and, crucially, closer to the garden club. The apartment was smaller, less burdened by history, and perfectly suited to my independent life. I sat with Mr. Klee one final time to execute my new estate plan. I established a robust trust to protect my assets from any future opportunistic claims. And I directed a portion of the $300,000 trust fund, the money Lucas had been waiting to seize, to be used for a different purpose. I made a significant donation to a local organization specializing in legal defense for elderly victims of familial financial abuse. I named the fund simply the Solvency Fund. I now spend my days volunteering, pursuing new passions, and thriving in my community. The scars remain, but they are no longer wounds. They are badges of survival. I often reflect on the true nature of my ordeal. I wasn't robbed of my money. I was robbed of my clarity. But the legal battle, the psychiatric evaluation, and the witness testimonies had not just affirmed my competence to the world. They had affirmed it to myself. I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, the city stretching before me, feeling the fresh air on my face. I had paid a high price for a powerful education. The greatest insight was the simplest one. True love cannot be bought with generosity. It must be freely given, or it is not love at all. The most important person to love and protect, I realized, was always myself. The silence in my apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with peace, dignity, and the boundless freedom of a life entirely my own. If you are still here listening, I want to say thank you very much for staying with me until the very end. Remember, I'm Evelyn, and the story that I shared with you was not just about the pain but also about the courage it took to reclaim my life. If my journey taught me anything, it's that standing up for yourself, even against those you love. This is the first step toward freedom and dignity. If there's one thing my journey taught me, it's this: choosing yourself even when it hurts. even when it means letting go of people you love, is the first real step toward freedom and dignity. If my story touched you or reminded you of your own strength, you're not alone. There are so many of us quietly fighting battles we never talk about. And sometimes, all we need is a reminder that our hearts can break and still beat strong. So if you want more real, emotional stories told from a mother's perspective, about people surviving betrayal, abuse, and unexpected heartbreak, and finding their voice again, go ahead and subscribe. Leave a comment below and tell me, how would you protect what's yours when the world turns its back on you? Remember this before you go. Your pain is valid. Your story matters. And even on the days you feel small, there is strength in you that hasn't even been tested yet. Together, we'll keep uncovering the courage hidden in ordinary lives. One story at a time. Thank you for being here.